Hello and welcome to the Middle School Bookmarker Show. This episode, we are going to break down some of the deeper meanings inside of the movie Monsters, Inc. We're going to do that by using these 4 questions. If you want to, you could write your thoughts down or maybe talk it out with a friend, whatever you want. But if you want to think about these before you hear our answers, now is the time to hit pause and do so. Otherwise, I hope you enjoy our analysis of Monsters, Inc. All right, Caitlin, we are back, and we are going to take a look at some questions that are going to help us understand the deeper meanings of this movie. The first one we're going to look at is, why did the writers write this movie? And when I sat and thought about this, my first thought was that I really think they wanted to write a fun movie that had lots of interesting monsters, sometimes scary monsters, sometimes funny ones, but they wanted to have a movie where they could creatively design all these different interesting looking monsters and ways that these monsters could be scary. I also think at a deeper level, they wrote this movie to help little kids be less afraid of monsters, like under their beds or in their closets. They wanted to have kids be a little bit less afraid of something that is a common fear among kids. Just like Boo was afraid at the beginning, by the end of the movie, she wasn't afraid at all.
I would agree with all of that. I definitely agree with the interesting monsters. It seems like they had a lot of fun designing everything, and the aesthetics were a lot of fun in the movie. When I thought about this question, I also thought some about how maybe they just wanted to teach children some important life lessons in a digestible and creative way. We see a lot of things about teamwork, about standing up for yourself, about the power that you have as an individual, and they just wanted to make it in a fun, interesting way that kids could understand.
I completely agree, and well said. So our second big question is, what lessons did the writers want their viewers to learn from this movie?
So when I thought about this question, I thought about a few things. One was the power that children have. Children were powering the city. If the children went away, there would be no power in the city. And even when they begin laughing, it's still the same thing. The children are pretty much running the city and the power that goes with it. And also, eventually, Boo stands up for herself and stands up to her fears. And that also is just having the power within yourself. I also thought about questioning and researching and how you can find different ways to do different things and reconsider new strategies. They didn't put a lot of research, it looks like, into how to power their city. So they were making these kids cry. They never thought about, different strategies. And eventually when they do, and they're able to make children laugh instead. And another thing I thought about was just not trusting authority figures just because you're supposed to. Sometimes you need to use your own judgment and logic and talk it out with others around you. You see that with Woodernoose. People kind of just trusted him because he was an authority figure, and we find out in the end that he had a lot of evil things going on in the background.
I love all those points, specifically your first one that you made about the power that they get from the children, representing the power that children have to stand up for their fears. I didn't consider that at all, and I think that's a great point of view to have. My big takeaway for what lessons the writers intended for us viewers to take away, the biggest one is just to reconsider assumptions. An assumption is when you think that you already know something without really looking at it critically. Sometimes you make assumptions and they end up being correct, but other times you make assumptions and they end up not being correct, and that can have very negative effects depending on the situation you're in. The assumptions that the viewers have going into the movie are that the monsters are evil. We're wrong about that. The assumptions that the monsters have in the movie is that they need children's screams to fuel the city. They're wrong about that. The monsters assume that kids are toxic. Wrong about that. Sully assumes that his actions are heroic and good and the right thing to do, and he ends up being wrong about that. So I think the writers intentionally wanted us to take the lesson away that we should reconsider our assumptions, and maybe we'll find a better, kinder, or more efficient or effective way to reach our goals.
I would definitely agree with that. And I think that ties in nicely with just questioning and researching. Don't assume things, but question what's going on around you.
And we're moving on to our third big question, which is, what did this story remind you of? And you might be surprised by my connection, but I actually thought about how this has some parallels to Iron Man, the very first Marvel Cinematic Universe movie. And it's because of the parallel between Tony Stark and Sully, if you can believe it. Stick with me. So Tony, at the very beginning of the movie, Iron Man, he thinks he's a good guy because he makes all these weapons, and his whole life he's just been making weapons for the military to help, he thinks. Then he realizes once he actually gets to the place where the weapons are used, he realizes that his missiles and his bombs, they hurt people, and they hurt people in a way that Iron Man, Tony Stark, couldn't have possibly understood. Well, think about this. Sully didn't understand that scaring kids was really bad at the beginning of the movie. He spent his entire career scaring kids because he thought it was right. Tony Stark is inspired to build the Iron Man armor because he realizes his past mistakes and that he realizes that a lot of things he did in the past were harmful and he wants to make up for it. Sully is inspired to take down Monsters Inc. for pretty much the same reason. He realizes that a lot of the things he did to these children was mean and he wants to make up for it and make things better.
I think that makes complete sense. What it reminded me of was a little more simpler. I kind of looked more internally and thought about how sometimes when you're working, it's important to step away from your work and understand the larger picture. Sometimes it's so easy to get so focused on something, such as they did with the screaming, that the only way to get this was screaming. They never took a step back and just kind of thought about things. So I kind of applied it to that in certain situations in my life. And also just having imagination and the importance of imagination to do different things. And that also really comes into play later when they start having everyone laugh instead. They all had to have creative imaginations to get kids to laugh at them. So I thought that was really nice to see.
So this story has reminded you to step back, reconsider, maybe take new creative approaches towards problems. And when you're stuck, take the step back and really reconsider that there might be another way to do things.
Yes, definitely.
All right, very last big question. I think the most important big question. When I go into a movie or I read a book or I'm watching a TV show, this is really the one that I'm most focused on. How will this change the way you think and act in the future? My big takeaway, I thought about this one for a while, is I want to make sure I consider how my actions really actually affect people. Sully thought he was doing a good thing until he saw how utterly terrified he made Boo, and he regretted it. Once Sully realized that human children weren't toxic and scaring them was actually a really nasty thing to do, he reconsidered his entire life. Had Sully not taken the chance and taken the time to get to know Boo, he probably would have just continued to scare and traumatize children every night for the rest of his scaring career.
I agree with that completely. For me, two things that I thought about was, again, problem solving. Sometimes you just, again, need to step back and there's multiple ways to look at things. And although that is something I do often, it's always good to keep doing it. And I also will be thinking, similar to you, about my interactions with others. Like you said, Sully did not realize how scary he was towards children, and he never stepped back and thought about it. And it wasn't until it was physically in front of his face on the television screen that he really came to terms with that. So sometimes you need to step back and look inward to be your best self and be kinder to others. And sometimes that also means reaching out to other people around you. And he did that as well. He talked about it with Mike and with other people in his life so he could fully understand why he felt this way.
Incredibly well said. How it's just wild that you can watch a movie. This is probably the third or fourth time I've seen Monsters Inc. And every single time, if you dig and you analyze and you critically think about things, you can pull away more and more every single time. The writers built all these things in there for us to analyze them and figure it out and apply them to our real lives. That was very well said, Caitlin. Caitlin, it has been an absolute pleasure doing this with you. Thank you so much for taking this Monsters Inc. project on with me. Viewers, be sure to check out some of the other stuff we have on the Middle School Bookmarkers YouTube channel, and we will see you later.
Thank you.